was on many drugs
welcome
at the
back, everybody, to the Law and Crime Network. I'm your host for this afternoon, Rachel Stockman, and we are waiting for testimony to resume again in the Burch trial. It's a trial we've been following out of Wisconsin. In the meantime, though, I want to bring in Andell Brown, who's a criminal defense attorney. You've been also watching this trial. We actually do have a live feed from the courthouse, and it looks to me like they're just getting out of a sidebar. Andell, tell me what you make of this case. Obviously very tragic, but is there enough to convict this defendant?
Well, I think there is enough, but it's not as strong as you would like it to be if you're on the prosecution side. I think the fact that you have the DNA on the items that we found, the fact that he's located by the cell phone towers in the field where her body was buried, I think those things are enough for a conviction. However, he has some explanations that it really was the boyfriend. The boyfriend came and discovered them. You can imagine a scenario where a boyfriend finds his girlfriend, whether they're on good terms or not, with another man in their driveway, and what type of problems that could lead to. So while the defense has a plausible defense, I think the prosecution side is stronger, but it's not as strong as you would want it to be if you're looking for.
And I'm going to have you hold that thought and stay with us, because we do have a live feed in the George Burch murder trial, and it looks like they're showing a tape, a police interview tape of Greg Matthew, who is the friend of the victim's boyfriend, who was there that night of the murder. So not there at the scene, but involved in the night of the murder. So let's take a listen.
I'm just going to turn it up a little bit.
There we go inside, got mad, you know, she's being stupid, you know, what the fuck. And he wants to drink, and I'm like, and we did a shot at the bar, like he was harassing like a bartender inside. And he didn't have his wallet on him, or he didn't, you know, when he left his wallet in my car, he didn't have any money on him or something, and the bartender's just like, give me $5, and you can have these stupid shots, and took the shots, and then I'm like, yeah.
And Greg, again, that was you?
Yes.
And that's what you told police on that night?
That is.
Judge, I would move for this exhibit to be admitted.
39.
Yes.
Right. Any objection to 39?
No, thank you.
39 is received.
Thank you. So as you heard in that video, Greg, you did tell law enforcement Doug is mad at that point, right? We just heard it. That's what.
Yeah, that he said, yeah, I'm mad. Why is she being so stupid?
And you heard.
Did I say it in a way that's made Doug sound angry? I was doing my impersonation of Doug, who's pretty carefree. He's saying, yeah, why is she being stupid? What the fuck? I mean, that is what he said, I guess.
And you heard in there, Doug wants to drink at that point?
I mean, yeah, he still wanted to take a shot. I did not. He did.
And Doug harassed the bartender?
I don't know what the bartender was feeling, but yes, at the time I had said, you know, that the bartender seemed annoyed when I walked up and pulled out $5 and gave it to him. But I didn't see Doug harassing him necessarily before I walked up. I assumed that.
And now this helps your memory. Doug specifically told you, Nikki is being stupid, what the fuck?
This has been asked and answered a number of times now.
All right, last time. Move on.
So eventually you decide to leave the sardine can?
Yes.
Were you still looking for Nikki at this point?
We drove up and down a few roads after.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. I asked a bad question. Okay. Were you still looking for Nikki around the sardine can before you got in your car?
I mean, we would have seen her as we walked from the sardine can to my car, but no, I don't know. I mean, if we saw her walking, we would have seen her.
And you went to your car at that point?
Yes.
And Doug was with you?
Yes.
Was anybody else with you?
There was a man I'm not aware of his name. He was coming to the car as well.
And then you guys got in your car, and what did you do after that?
I had done a line of Adderall.
And Doug snorted a line of Adderall with you?
I believe he did. I'm not 100% sure. I believe I told the police that he did. But thinking back, it'd be so unusual to see him do that. But it is possible. But I know I did.
You've seen him snort drugs before, right?
Objection, reapproach.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Law and Crime Network. We were just listening to some testimony from Greg Matthew, who was there at the bar where Nicole was last seen the night of the murder. It got a little testy between the attorney and the witness. Andell, are you on the line with me? What did you make of that?
Well, I mean, these things often happen when you have an attorney that's very aggressive about the cross-examination and a witness who realizes that the attorney wants a certain answer and they're determined not to give it. So you have this battle of wills going on in front of the jury. I think it happens a lot, and I think jurors come to expect it, especially if they're watching these shows like Law and Order and other shows where they show these dramatic exchanges between the attorney and the witness on the stand.
Do you think that it's effective?
I think it's effective if you're getting to your point. As a defense attorney or as an attorney, period, you want to deal with witnesses in a way that gets your message across and always goes back to your theory of defense. If it doesn't do that and all it shows is you fighting with the witness, then you're not making your point. You're not getting any closer to your desired outcome.
You kind of end up looking a little bit more like a bully than anything else. Well, we'll see how this continues. Right now, it looks like they're in a brief sidebar as soon as we see testimony resume with this particular witness, who is a friend of the victim's boyfriend, who was there having drinks that night at the bar before Nicole went missing and was later found to be murdered. If you're just joining us in this case, George Burch is on trial, first-degree intentional homicide in the killing of Nicole Vanderheiden. She's a mother in the Green Bay area. The defense is trying to blame her boyfriend. Looks like this witness is back on the stand. Sidebar over, so let's take a listen.
One of the lines of Adderall, yes. But I can't say 100% with clarity looking back on it now whether he did or not. I'm not sure. I would think that most likely he did.
And when you say snort Adderall, does that mean does it come in a powder substance?
No, it does not.
So
It's to be taken by mouth, obviously.
Is it a pill?
Yes, it is a pill.
And then you have to crush that?
Yes.
And you guys took the time to crush it, line it up, and
I
snort
did
it?
before he came to the car.
So you weren't together when you first got to the car? You didn't?
Now, I got to the car separately from him.
Do you know what area of the bar he was in when you left?
I believe the smoking section, but I can't be sure since I was not there.
When was the last time you saw him in the sardine can?
We were leaving. I walked out to the car a moment before he did.
So then after you snort the amphetamine, what do you do next?
We leave the parking lot, drive up and down a few different roads. Once I see Gray Street, I know it connects to Atkinson because I lived in that area. I got to Atkinson.
And then just a little before then, were you still looking for Nikki when you were leaving?
I mean, we drove up and down a couple streets, seeing if maybe she was walking back. It was close to bar close. If she had decided she didn't have a phone, she didn't know, how to get home, that maybe she cooled down and she was walking back to the sardine can.
And you were the one driving at that time?
Yes, I was.
Were you more sober at that time?
Yes. I probably had 2 shots over the last 3 hours at that point.
Were you still potentially risking an OWI at that time?
I mean, I don't know how quickly my blood alcohol goes down over time, so I'm not 100% sure. But yes, I still think that it was probably risky. I probably had 5 beers at the concert and 2 shots later from, that's from 8 o'clock to 2 in the morning. And I had 2 beers at Angela Delphos's earlier that night.
Did you stop drinking in part because you were trying to find Nikki and it was more chaotic?
I stopped drinking in part because I did not want to risk an OWI, and I wanted to make sure that I was reasonable to drive.
And again, you were looking for Nikki because you were worried about her and she meant a lot to you as a friend.
Yes.
You cared about her.
Yes.
So then you said you took Gray to Atkinson, which I believe then you take the highways to get to Doug's. Do you remember what time you got to Doug's house?
I believe at 2:45 around that time.
Where'd you park?
I believe in the driveway.
Do you remember if the garage door was open?
I'm not sure.
Do you remember which way you entered his house?
I'm not sure if we went through the garage or if we went through the front door. I know when I left, I went through the front door, but I'm not sure.
You didn't stay very long?
No.
And you left around 3 a.m.?
Yes.
When you left, was the garage door open?
I'm not sure. I do not know.
When you did leave, were you still looking on the streets just in case Nikki was walking home?
I mean, not really. I mean, the idea that she'd be walking that far away. I mean, yeah, if I saw a blonde girl walking down Monroe, I would have stopped and given her a ride home, but no, I did not see her.
Were you still worried about her at that time?
I mean, yeah, how was she gonna get home? We thought maybe she would be home already, but she obviously was not.
And when you were in Doug's house, you were actively having a group conversation. You were talking about ways and things to try to look for Nikki?
I mean, I can't really recall exactly what the conversation between Doug, Dallas, and I was. We were just telling her, try to call Nikki. We don't know where she is.
And then you ultimately went home and went to sleep?
Yes.
When did you hear again from Doug on the 21st?
I believe at noon, around noon. I'm not exactly sure at the exact time of the Facebook message. I know in the missing persons that I had said 9:30. When I later went back and checked the timestamp, I believe it was 12:04. I'm not sure. At that point, I had not looked back at every single text the entire night.
Do you remember what time you responded to him?
I mean, I think soon after.
And sometime after 4 p.m. was when Doug decided to file a missing persons report?
I don't know if it was after 4 or prior to 4. I mean,
You're
I
just not
wasn't
sure.
with him when he had texted me at some point that he had contacted, as many people as she could that he could think of that she would be with. And he sent me a text saying, call me. I'm not sure if he sent me a text saying he was doing the missing persons report or if he told me on the phone verbally that he was going to do the missing persons report.
And you were with him when he gave the missing persons report?
I arrived at the house hoping that I could help.
And that was after 4:30?
Yes.
And as we talked about, Greg, you met with law enforcement a few times.
Yes.
I believe May 21st, May 23rd, and May 26th.
Yes.
And you met 2 times with law enforcement at the sheriff's office? 2 of those times were at the sheriff's office?
Yes.
And you always agreed to meet with law enforcement?
Yes.
They never had to force you to come down?
No.
They asked you for your DNA and you voluntarily gave that to them?
Yes.
You gave consent for officers to look through your car once on May 21st?
Yes.
You gave them consent to download your phone?
Yes.
You gave them consent and voluntarily gave them your car to be processed by the crime lab?
Yes.
And like you said before, that was pretty inconvenient.
Yeah, they had it for a month. It came back kind of destroyed.
And during all that time, you never demanded that they go get a warrant?
Yes.
They couldn't hear his last response.
Keep the volume up, Greg, but
Sorry.
repeat your answer to the question about your vehicle. Why don't you?
That my vehicle was returned, you know, kind of destroyed with luminol everywhere. I mean,
And you never demanded that police get a warrant?
the Monday morning, I was kind of frustrated that they were going to come back after they had already taken my car the night before, that they're going to come back and take it again. But I didn't demand them get a warrant, and he told me he was taking it either way. So he had my consent to search for him, and they took it.
So you gave them pretty much a consent to do everything that they did in their investigation in this?
Yes, I did.
And you were as cooperative, really, as they could get?
I tried to be, yes.
And then on May 26th, that's when you had another meeting, but that was not at the sheriff's office?
Yes.
And that was with Investigator Olmsted?
Yes.
You kind of told Investigator Olmsted that you had been doing nothing but thinking about Nikki's case?
I was trying to prove to them that there's no possible way that Doug could have been involved with this while he was sitting in jail, and the child of his mother had been murdered. There couldn't be a worse place for him to be right now when he should be.
What was Doug in jail for?
At the
I'm
time.
going to object to, he doesn't have any foundation to answer that question. He's not the arresting officer.
Relevance, Attorney Schuchert.
Do you know what Doug was in jail for?
Same
That's
answer,
laying the
no
foundation.
We know why he was in jail. Let's move on to our next question. It's already been established.
And when you were meeting with Investigator Olmsted, you told him that you were driving the streets of Green Bay and you were doing everything you possibly could to find Nikki.
At what point?
When you met with Investigator Olmsted, you told him that you were looking and you were trying to find Nikki when you were driving from the watering hole to the sardine can.
I mean, we drove up and down some roads looking in an area that we thought she could be walking in. I believed at that time, yes.
And you did as much as you could to try to find Nikki on that night.
I mean, obviously, if we'd have known what was going to happen, we'd have scoured the city, but unfortunately, in hindsight, we did not.
So you even have some regret that you, to this day, wish you would have done more.
Yes.
And that's because Nikki was a good friend, a loving mother, and you cared about her.
Yeah, she was a great person.
And like we said earlier, you guys shared similar interests. Nikki understood you, you understood Nikki. She understood the things you were interested in, even when some of your other friends didn't. You cared about Nikki, right?
Yes.
And then when you were meeting with Investigator Olmsted, you told him you wanted to you wanted to tell him about what you'd been thinking about, and you told him that you truly believed that Nikki loved you.
As a friend, yes.
And you loved Nikki.
As a friend, yes.
I have no further questions.
Redirect.
Thank you. Sir, at some point I think your voice dropped a little bit when you were answering some questions. And it's hard, it's a bigger courtroom. At one point you indicated that while you were in touch with Nikki, you responded that you were both in calm moods. Is that correct, meaning you and Doug?
Yeah, I mean, Doug was intoxicated, but he was just fun and jovial, you know, about everything at that point.
And you were indicating that you were in contact with her and she was being told, we'll be there, just stay put. And that was during this time period when you responded on cross that you and Doug were both in calm moods at that point.
Yes.
And in fact, then I couldn't quite hear you. I heard you say the words, I believe, that he was not upset or angry, or did you say he was upset or angry at that point?
I do not believe that Doug was upset or angry. I mean, maybe upset is the wrong word, but he was not angry. He was not yelling. He was, you know, more in a joking manner of why she's doing this. Like, what did I do? I don't know what I did. You know, why is she acting like this?
And when you were cross-examined with using the word mad when you spoke to the officers,
Yes.
did you mean that as far as being angry or irritated with what was going on and the fact he couldn't find her?
I mean, he had said to me, you know, I'm mad that she's acting stupid. I mean, what is she doing? I didn't, you know, that is just a term that he used when he said it to me.
Did he seem angry when he said it?
No, he did not seem angry.
You were asked with respect to some of your conversations about, there was one time when Doug could have been perceived as, quote, a drunken asshole. Is that the same occasion when he actually got punched in the face?
Objection. Relevancy.
Relevancy, Attorney Kerrigan-Mears.
This was the question that was brought up by the defense with respect to him being perceived in a certain fashion. We need to know the circumstances involved. This was certainly brought up on cross, and it's fair to us to go back into it and get to the whole picture that was taking place.
Limitation, I'll overrule the objection. Go ahead.
Is that the same occasion that you told the officer about that, in fact, Doug actually got punched in the face?
I believe that I told the officer that on a few occasions, Doug had been punched and never responded.
So he didn't physically respond after being...
No.
I'm sorry, if I could just finish.
Sorry.
He would get punched in the face and he didn't become physically aggressive?
No, I've never seen Doug be physically aggressive.
And he didn't punch back?
No.
When you were viewing him, is that correct?
Yes.
You were more specific with respect to the couple of times you did seem to see them have a dispute, is that correct? Meaning Nikki and Doug, I'm sorry.
Yes.
And one of those you indicated was involving a Packer game?
Yes.
And the other one was at a reception?
It was at a wedding.
Oh, at the wedding. On either of those occasions was Nikki drinking?
The wedding, she was not. She was pregnant at that time. At the Packer game, she was, yes. Or at the bar. We were at the Ravine.
So whatever the dispute was about, she ended up walking off, is that correct?
I believe so. I was not there when they had their dispute. They were both having a fun time when I dropped them off at the Bar East that night.
You indicated after one of these disputes that you learned about, you ended up back at their residence with them?
Yeah, I stopped over there after I left Dustin and Christina Clark's house.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Law&Crime Network. I'm your host for this afternoon, Rachel Stockman, and we are listening to some very critical testimony from the friend of the victim's boyfriend, who was at the bar the evening of the murder and was testifying to his conversations with Douglas Dietrich. Now, Douglas Dietrich, he is not on trial for this murder. George Burch is. Douglas Dietrich is the boyfriend of the victim and the man that the defense attorneys is trying to point the finger at. So let's bring in our guest this afternoon, Andell Brown. Andell, what do you make of this testimony? Prosecution witness, but I think he did some things to help the defense here.
Right. He talks about the tumultuous relationship that Dietrich had with the victim here. He talks about him being mad and angry at different points in time. I think one of the biggest problems the prosecution has is how do they establish the motive that George Burch had for committing the murder? If you shift the attention to Dietrich, you can see why he would have been angry, why he could have been upset if he finds his girlfriend with another man. George Burch, on the other hand, they have yet to explain why he would have killed her.
Yeah, that's what's interesting about it. We know that his DNA was found on her that evening, which is pretty damning evidence, but what would be the motivation for him then wanting to kill her? Was there some kind of confrontation between him and Dietrich that caused this? I mean, where do you think the prosecution is going with this?
I think the prosecution is relying on the circumstantial evidence. They're relying on the fact that his DNA was found on the, I think they also talked about a park nearby where they found paper towels with blood. They haven't said whose blood is on that, but I believe they're going to try to relate that back to George Burch, as well as the DNA evidence obtained from the clothing that was dumped, and the fact that his phone was located in the area where her body was. That's
nothing further.
Any last redirect?
No, thank
you. And where do you think now, you know, when we start seeing the prosecution's case wrapping up, where the defense needs to go with this?
Well, I think the defense's strategy is to point to all the things that the prosecution can't answer. I have a strategy that I've used in cases. We call this where we're going to hold the prosecution to their burden. We're going to say they have to prove it. If you have a question, you got to log into www.askthestate.com. They have to answer the question. If they can't answer the questions, you don't have evidence beyond a reasonable doubt, and you must find this person not guilty, whether you think they did it or not. And I think that's what the defense's strategy, even though their story isn't the strongest, and there's proximity to the crime. They have the clothes in the field. They have George Burch there at the place where she was buried. The prosecution cannot disprove the fact that Dietrich could have been involved, or he could have been angry, because that evidence is coming in even through his friends and other people who you would think would be on the prosecution side.
So let's switch gears just for a little bit, Andell, because there's another trial that we are following out of the Florida area, a little bit closer to your neck of the woods. And it's a very, very tragic story. Donald Smith, he is the convicted pedophile, convicted murderer who killed 8-year-old Cherish Periwinkle. We were here following that trial gavel to gavel last week, and this week we're in the death penalty phase of that case. What we had today was a bunch of expert witnesses talking about Donald Smith's mental state here. What do you make of this defense strategy? Do you think it's going to fly for the jurors? Do you think they're going to show mercy and save this man's life?
This particular crime, not only the crime, but the way it happened is particularly heinous. There appears to be a lot of premeditation, a lot of deception, and the brutality that occurred. The medical examiner had a hard time holding it together and had to take a break as she described the types of injuries to Cherish Periwinkle's body. So I think if the juror looks at those facts, the age of Cherish Periwinkle when she died, the fact that this occurred while he was engaged in the felony crime of murder and of rape and sexual assault, the fact that this was cold, calculated, he planned, he followed, he stalked her, he deceived her mother. I think there's enough aggravating factors there for them to decide for the death penalty. I think the defense strategy is to establish that he has mental illness. He suffered from this for a long time. He has a sick mind. He has impulse control, and that he shouldn't have the death penalty. I think they're trying, but I don't think it carries the day. If the jurors listen to all the evidence, they take everything into consideration, I think we're going to have a unanimous decision for the death penalty.
Yeah, I think you might be absolutely right on this one, Andell Brown. In the scale of heinous crimes, and when you talk about the aggravators on the list of when you're considering the death penalty, 2 check marks are already there, one being the age of the victim, just 8 years old, and then also, you have the fact that he was convicted of rape, and that would be another aggravator. Of course, when the jurors weigh whether they're going to put somebody to death, they weigh what are called aggravators and mitigators. Do you see, so I guess the defense here is going for this mental health as the mitigator in the Donald Smith trial, but I'm with you, I don't see it flying with the jurors.
No, I don't think they're buying it, especially when we saw the prosecution examine one of the defense's chief witnesses, and he had to admit that he could not make the conclusion that it was either his brain defect took away his right to choose. It took away his right to make a conscious decision that he was going to take the actions he did on that fateful morning. So if they can't prove it, then I think the prosecution has everything on their side to show that the aggravators are intact and that the death penalty is appropriate.
Okay, Andell, I want to switch gears again back to that George Burch case that we've been following out of Wisconsin, and we're going to show you a live shot from inside the courtroom right now. The attorneys are in a sidebar, and my producer is telling me that Douglas Dietrich is about to take the stand here, and as you know, this guy is going to be a critical witness for the prosecution, because this man is who the defense is trying to pin the murder on. Andell, what can we expect from this testimony? I would think there's going to be some pretty tough cross-examination when we hear from him.
Absolutely. The defense is going to grill Douglas Dietrich about his relationship. They're going to grill him about his demeanor on that night. They're going to grill him about how angry he was, and they're going to grill him about his whereabouts. The Fitbit that the prosecution has brought up, saying initially they wanted to establish that he was asleep at the time, but the judge didn't allow that evidence in, saying it was not reliable. He did allow the evidence in to show location, the GPS, where he was at the time. It looks like he was at home. So that's what I expect to see. I expect the prosecution to rebut the defense's supposition that Dietrich was the killer by showing he wasn't there, he couldn't have been involved, he was at home when this crime occurred.
And Andell, hold that thought and stick with us. Critical testimony about to happen in the George Burch murder trial out of Wisconsin. Douglas Dietrich, the boyfriend of the victim, about to take the stand. It looks like we have our feed there. I think we have some audio, so let's take a listen and just see what's going on in court right now. Okay, so what is going on in court? This is the George Burch murder trial. Douglas Dietrich is being sworn in. You saw him walk up there, and he is going to take the stand in just minutes. The prosecutor is going to get their turn to ask him questions. Looks like he's sitting down. Andell, our guest for the afternoon, is going to listen with me at this critical testimony. Let's take a listen in court.
And where do you live?
What was that?
Where do you live?
Ledgeview.
Are you from this area originally?
Yes, I am.
Were you born in this area?
I was born in Green Bay.
Did you go to school in this area?
Yes, I did.
Where did you go to school?
I went to Dan's Elementary School, and then Edison Middle School, and Preble High School.
Did you graduate from Preble?
What's that?
Did you graduate from Preble?
Yes, I did.
And what year?
2000.
Do you have any education after high school?
Some college, some technical college, and took some various courses online.
What do you do for a living?
I work for a family business and self-employed as well, doing general contracting, building homes. Did apartment rental management for a lot of years as well.
What business do you work for?
Dietrich Builders.
Can you tell us a little bit about that business?
Well, my grandpa actually started the business in 1955, and my dad was always working with him since I think he was 18, and eventually took over the business and worked with them continually since. I think I started working on job sites and stuff like that, and when I was in high school around 1990, the late 1990s, when I was still in high school.
You said you do that, but you're also self-employed?
Yeah.
Can you tell me about the self-employment?
I have a corporation. I just primarily do work through my family's company, and work down in Florida as well, where I'm a certified building contractor.
Okay. Do you have any other licenses or certifications?
I also have a licensed dwelling contractor in Wisconsin that I've had about 6 years or so.
Can you tell us about your family?
My mother, my father, my amazing little son Dylan, and my grandfather on my dad's side, and that's the immediate family, and then my brother and his wife and their little one.
You talked about having a son, Dylan. Who's Dylan's mother?
Nicole.
And what's Nicole's full name?
Nicole Vanderheiden.
What did she go by?
Nikki.
Is that what you called her?
Yep, always called her Nikki.
When did you meet Nikki?
I met her at Jimmy C's in January. I think it was 2015, or early mid-January.
What was the occasion?
I was just out with a few friends at Jimmy C's and just having some drinks, and I think it was a night or two before. It was like a playoff weekend for NFL football, and I don't know, there was a band playing, and Nikki came up to me, and we had a drink, and we hit it off right away, and just it went from there, and just ended up talking for an hour or so, and everything went well.
So then after that, did you start dating shortly thereafter?
Yeah, pretty much from that night on, it was, we weren't really separated much at all.
Pretty close after that?
Very close, yep.
Okay. Shortly after that, did Nikki become pregnant?
Yeah, say, I don't know if it was like a month or so after that.
And at some point in time, did Nikki move in with you?
Yes, she did. I think it was late summer, early fall that year. I think around September, October-ish, or maybe even a little earlier. I do remember it being warm out when we were moving her stuff from her nearby apartment.
Are you aware whether Nikki had children from another relationship?
Yes, Tyler and Michaela. She had two children with her ex-husband, Brian.
How old are her other children?
They were 9 and 10 at the time.
All right, folks, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. We were just watching the George Burch murder trial going on in Wisconsin. We were just hearing from a really, really critical witness in all of this, and that is Douglas Dietrich. I'm here alongside with my guest for the afternoon, Andell Brown. Andell, what did you make of this witness testimony? Honestly, I was a little disappointed they stopped for lunch because he was just starting to get to the, the critical stuff that we need to know about what happened to Nikki that night. Of course, just a little background for our viewers that are just joining us. George Burch accused of killing a young woman. The defense is trying to point the finger at Douglas Dietrich, who is now on the stand. Andell, weigh in.
Well, I mean, obviously we haven't gotten to the meat, and we're all on the edge of our seats waiting to get to that critical point, but we're not there just yet. But just from the initial impression of him when he takes the stand, he appears calm, he appears credible. Obviously, he's a good-looking man, when he sits up there for however that plays out to the jury. I think those are the things you first think when you see him. And as we were listening to his testimony, it seems like they were out together. They're going to this concert. They're friends. There's drinking involved. It doesn't appear to be an out-of-control situation. Just like you, I'm waiting for them to get into the meat of that testimony to see where and how they lost contact, what he does next, and why he did not report her missing until 4 p.m. the next day.
Yeah, that's going to be very, very interesting. They talked a little bit, though, about how much both parties, Nicole Vanderheiden, the victim, and Douglas Dietrich, how much they both had to drink. What did you make of that in terms of how that could affect his memory potentially?
Well, I mean, I think from what he said, he had 6 to 10 drinks, including shots. And over the short period of time of a concert, that can be pretty significant. I mean, it sounds like they had a really good night at the concert. Sounds like Nicole had quite a few drinks herself. So that could affect memory. We haven't kind of gotten to the part where we can figure out whether or not it was blacking out.
Andell, I am so sorry. We're going to work on our connection there via Skype. We just lost you as you were getting to some really important stuff. As soon as we get you back on a secure line where the connection's a little better, we'll bring Andell back. In the meantime, I want to update our viewers on what's going on because we have a lot of live trials today. We're following 2 critical ones. One, the George Burch trial, who is accused of first-degree intentional homicide, of killing a young woman in the Green Bay area. He's trying to point the finger at Douglas Dietrich, the very man who's on the stand as we broke for lunch and who's going to be on the stand when we get back. We were talking to Andell about drinking that night in question in 2016, and this is very important because it plays into a little bit of how things unfolded. So I want us to play some of the witness testimony from Douglas Dietrich when he's specifically answering questions about how much alcohol the 2 parties had. Let's take a listen.
You recall, at least up until the time that you separated, was Nikki drinking fairly regularly as well?
Yep.
Have you had drinks with Nikki in the past?
Yes, I have.
Was she a frequent drinker?
No, she wasn't. It was more when we had first met. We went out quite often, on the weekends. And then, of course, when she was pregnant, she didn't drink at all. And we'd still go out, and she would drive and be the designated driver, and go out and meet up with various friends and have a good time. And she would drive and I guess home. But then afterwards, I think she probably only drank a handful of times at most since Dylan was born.
Okay, so that's what you meant by afterwards. So since Dylan was born, she was an infrequent drinker?
Yeah.
Do you know if she, what was the pace she was drinking that night?
Pretty quickly. I mean, I remember on the first, I think, beer or two, we got, I think it was in plastic cups, and I think she had like 2 down, and I was still on my first one. And thought I was drinking it kind of fast, and she was chugging them down pretty.
And you were drinking at a pretty fair pace yourself?
Yes.
After you got separated from Nikki, you mentioned some shots. Were you taking shots at the watering hole?
Yeah, I had numerous shots. I mean, like probably a good handful of shots.
And you met up with some friends of yours, you and Greg?
Yep.
Specifically, you mentioned a Katie. Who was that?
It was Katie Hanna at the time. She was actually, at the time, she was married to I think the singer of Annex that was the opening band.
And you and Greg were talking to her.
And welcome back, everybody, to Law and Crime Network. You are just listening to some replay from the George Burch murder trial. Douglas Dietrich, the victim's boyfriend, is on the stand. That's who you just heard from. They're in a lunch break now, but he's a critical witness because he talks about what happened in the night in question. We kind of got cut off, as Andell and I both mentioned, before we got to really the meat of what he's going to testify to. So as soon as he's back on the stand this afternoon, we're going to bring that to you. They're in a lunch break in that case. I want to bring Andell in as a criminal defense attorney, and I'm curious, what do you think your strategy for a witness like this when we get to cross-examination? Because I'm really eager in this case to see what the defense attorney does during cross-examination. This is the guy that they're trying to pin the murder on.
Yeah, I think the defense has done a great job of giving the prosecution double duty. The prosecution has to prove their case against George Burch, but they also have to disprove the case against Dietrich. And now they have to make sure they do both of those things. And the defense, who doesn't have the burden on them, they can pick and choose their spots. I think for Dietrich, what the defense has to do is raise those ever important questions that lead to reasonable doubt. How did he lose her that night? Why did he not call to report her missing until 4 p.m. the next day? Why would he just assume she was with someone else and he wasn't able to check? I think they're going to make sure they grill him about their relationship, whether it was volatile or violent at any point in time. I think they're also going to get into whether he was angry that night, some of the testimony we heard from his friends, whether they got into an argument. I think they're also going to harp on the fact that they were in a relationship. He would have been very upset if he found her with someone else.
Okay, so since you brought that up, I want to change things up a little bit in the control room because we were going to play more of Doug Dietrich, but you talked about another witness that was on the stand earlier this morning, and that was Greg Matthew. I think I'm pronouncing it right. He talked about how there was a little bit of tension between Douglas Dietrich and Nicole. So I want to see if we can play it's clip number GB13, so you all can hear that testimony again, and then Andell and I will talk about it.
And that's what you told police on that night?
That is.
Judge, I would move for this exhibit to be admitted.
39.
Yes.
Right. Any objection to 39?
No, thank you.
39 is received.
Thank you. So as you heard in that video, Greg, you did tell law enforcement Doug is mad at that point, right? We just heard it. That's what.
Yeah, that he said, yeah, I'm mad. Why is she being so stupid?
And you heard.
Did I say it in a way that's made Doug sound angry? I was doing my impersonation of Doug, who's pretty carefree. He's saying, yeah, why is she being stupid? What the fuck? I mean, that is what he said, I guess.
And you heard in there, Doug wants to drink at that point?
I mean, yeah, he still wanted to take a shot. I did not. He did.
And Doug harassed the bartender?
I don't know what the bartender was feeling, but yes, at the time I had said, you know, that the bartender seemed annoyed when I walked up and pulled out $5 and gave it to him. But I didn't see Doug harassing him necessarily before I walked up. I assumed that.
And now this helps your memory. Doug specifically told you Nikki is being stupid. What the fuck?
This has been asked and answered a number of times now.
All right, last time. Move on.
So eventually you decide to leave the sardine can?
Yes.
Were you still looking for Nikki at this point?
We drove up and down a few roads after.
I'm sorry, I'm going to interrupt you. I asked a bad question.
Okay.
Were you still looking for Nikki around the sardine can before you got in your car?
I mean, we would have seen her as we walked from the sardine can to my car, but no, I don't know. I mean, if we saw her walking, we would have seen her.
Well, there you have it. There is some of the testimony of Doug Dietrich's friend that Andell was referring to about how Doug Dietrich, the night of her disappearance, Nicole Vanderheiden's disappearance and her murder, said some negative things, seemed to have some confrontation with her, was kind of pissed off at her. Andell, what did you make of that?
Right. I think that is a conflict with what the prosecution is trying to present, or at least the testimony we've heard to this point, because the testimony we've heard to this point makes it seem like it was just a normal night. They were having a great time. And I think the defense would be smart to seize on that conflict and say, this guy has something to hide. He's up here trying to paint a perfect picture of this perfect family life, a perfect evening, when in reality it was tumultuous and there was a lot of conflict going back and forth. And I would argue that the conflict ultimately led to the death of Nicole.
This is really going to be fascinating because just in terms of how Douglas Dietrich is as a witness, let's talk about that a little bit. As we've mentioned, Andell and I have mentioned, we haven't really gotten into the meat of his testimony, and we're expecting that this afternoon in the Wisconsin trial. But I think he comes across really, really well, at least so far. And of course, he hasn't been ruffled yet by cross-examination. But in my mind, he comes across as a very believable witness. What do you make out of it, Andell?
No, he does. He appears to be very credible and put together. However, I think the defense's argument would be that he seems a little too put together. His story, his demeanor seems a little more rehearsed than it should be. And that's what I would argue if I was the defense. I would look at his character and the fact that he paints a pretty picture of the family. He paints a pretty picture of the night, and he even paints a pretty picture of himself sitting on that stand. But once we get behind the facade, there's a lot more there than meets the eye.
I think you're absolutely right. And now that you say that, although he did come across pretty well, I'm thinking back to some of his testimony and trying to digest it. And one of the things he was asked specifically about was his relationship with Nicole Vanderheiden. And he asked about how, Nicole got pregnant about a month after the two of them were together. And he talked a little bit about his son, Dylan, which I think that's Nicole right there, a picture of her. And I believe that's Dylan, that little tiny baby right there, obviously newborn in that picture. He didn't really get very emotional when he was talking about his son, who is now 2 years old and doesn't have a mother anymore.
Right. I mean, imagine what it must be like to go through that and your child losing their mother at such a young age. That has to affect anyone. And when you don't appear to show the proper emotion, the defense or the other side can always argue that this is a cold, calculated person.
Yeah, well, we'll certainly see what happens. I want to go back and play some of the sound from Doug Dietrich from testimony earlier. And this is specifically when he talks about his relationship with Nikki, as they call her, because I think that's very important. Andell and I were just talking about that. Andell, you'll stick around for a few more minutes, and we'll be right back after that.
After that, did Nikki become pregnant?
Yeah, say, I don't know if it was like a month or so after that.
And at some point in time, did Nikki move in with you?
Yes, she did. I think it was late summer, early fall that year. I think around September, October-ish, or maybe even a little earlier. I do remember it being warm out when we were moving her stuff from her nearby apartment.
Are you aware whether Nikki had children from another relationship?
Yes, Tyler and Michaela. She had two children with her ex-husband, Brian.
How old are her other children?
They were 9 and 10 at the time. I believe they're 12 and 11 now.
And when Nikki came to move in with you, did the kids move in as well?
Yes, they did.
What was the custody arrangement, if you recall?
I don't know if there's any formal custody arrangement. They were on pretty good terms. That the kids would usually be with us during the week, and it kind of varied a little bit if it was during the summer or during school. If it was during school time, they would be with us during the week, and then Brian would take the kids on the weekend, and then we'd pick them back up on Monday after school.
And you mentioned that relationship, at least from what you observed, was on pretty good terms?
Yes, from what I observed, yep, they were on good terms.
Did you know Brian very well?
Not very well at all, no.
I assume that you had plenty of opportunity to observe Nikki as a mother?
Yes.
And how was she with Dylan and her other kids?
She was a very good mother. That's one part I liked a lot about her, was just how caring, and you know, she did everything that the kids needed and taught them well. Her being a teacher, you know, was always about education and health. And
so you knew that Nikki was a teacher?
Yes.
In the time period that she lived with you, was she working much as a teacher?
Early when she was pregnant, and that spring when I had just met her, she was working quite a bit then. And then as fall, when she was later in the pregnancy, the working slowed down a little bit, and then, you know, took time to rest and prepare for.
So that is Douglas Dietrich in the George Burch murder trial. He's one of the witnesses, a critical witness in this trial, because he's the one that the defense is trying to pin the murder on. He's describing his relationship with Nicole Vanderheiden. And that was his girlfriend who he had a child with. And I'd expect, Andell, as we get into cross later this afternoon, the prosecution kind of glossed over their relationship, but I expect that probably will be a focus of the cross-examination.
Into that, they have to figure out a way to get under this witness's skin and make him lose this composed demeanor that he has right now. With a witness like that presents well, that appears credible, you want to show the jury that there's more there than what they've initially been shown. You want to show them that this demeanor is not the way he is all the time. This calm, cool, collective story that he's telling is not the whole story. And that's what the defense has to do. So I expect on cross-examination for them to use tactics to get under his skin and try to bring out some emotion and make him lose control. If they can do that, I think that will significantly help their case.
Well, we'll certainly see what happens. I mean, as a defense attorney, what is your tactic in a situation like this to try to get under someone like Douglas Dietrich's skin? Because he does seem like a relatively smart individual, a relatively put-together individual. He's not someone maybe that's easily rattled. We saw earlier from one of his friends, Adam Mattu, who was on the stand, he got a little bit ruffled, I should say, during cross-examination, but he didn't seem quite as put together as Douglas.
Right, he did not. So as a defense attorney, one of the things I would do is try to get to those things that you know he's uncomfortable talking about them, and you know that he's uncomfortable dealing with them, because the prosecution, because he's their witness, they try to gloss over and skate over these issues in the relationship. If I was on the prosecution side, I would have addressed in speaking with him what his friend said about that night, about how their interactions were, about what type of tension could have been in the air, about him saying that he thinks she's acting stupid. Those are things that should have been addressed by the prosecution so they can take away the defense's steam. They didn't do that. On cross-examination, I'm going straight for it.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. The prosecutor, it's always wise, I think, when you have a weakness as a prosecutor in a witness. In other words, you know that there's something there that could be used against your case. Don't you think it's wise, Andell, to take that head on in front of the jurors? Because a lot of times when the defense then brings it out of the witness, like they did in this case, it kind of makes the prosecutor look like they're trying to hide something.
And that's exactly why you want to diffuse it before the other side gets a chance to bring it out. You want to present it to the jury and give your witness an opportunity to explain under favorable conditions. Because if they're trying to explain under cross-examination, a smart defense attorney is going to cut them off and is not going to let them get out the explanation that they want to give. They're going to make sure they're asking them leading questions, and they're taking control of the testimony at that point in time. When that person is on direct examination and the prosecution is questioning them, they're the star of the show. When the defense attorney gets up and it's a cross-examination, I'm the star of the show.
Well, you're a very good attorney, Andell, because I have to say, most of the trials we've watched that have been effective in terms of prosecution strategy is when the prosecution does take unfavorable facts head on in front of the jurors, because then it kind of is an anticlimactic for the defense attorneys, because what do they have left other than to just reiterate the same thing that the guy just said in front of the prosecutor? Really interesting. I think you can stick around for a few more minutes for us, right, Andell?
Certainly.
Okay, great. So in the meantime, as we wait for both of our trials that we are following here today on the Law and Crime Network to begin, could be a very action-packed afternoon in the George Burch murder trial, which is what Andell and I had just been discussing. We're expecting the boyfriend to continue his testimony. Douglas Dietrich, the boyfriend of the victim in that case, the woman who was killed, he's going to continue his testimony this afternoon, and we're going to really get to some of the meat of that, so it's going to be very interesting. You're going to want to stick around for that. In the meantime, as we wait, in case you missed it, I want to play Greg Matthew, the friend of the victim's boyfriend, who was with Douglas Dietrich that night, and you can hear how he got a little flustered during the cross-examination. Let's take a listen.
Did you stop drinking in part because you were trying to find Nikki and it was more chaotic?
I stopped drinking in part because I did not want to risk an OWI, and I wanted to make sure that I was reasonable to drive.
And again, you were looking for Nikki because you were worried about her and she meant a lot to you as a friend.
Yes.
You cared about her.
Yes.
So then you said you took Gray to Atkinson, which I believe then you take the highways to get to Doug's. Do you remember what time you got to Doug's house?
I believe at 2:45 around that time.
Where'd you park?
I believe in the driveway.
Do you remember if the garage door was open?
I'm not sure.
Do you remember which way you entered his house?
I'm not sure if we went through the garage or if we went through the front door. I know when I left, I went through the front door, but I'm not sure.
You didn't stay very long?
No.
And you left around 3 a.m.?
Yes.
When you left, was the garage door open?
I'm not sure. I do not know.
When you did leave, were you still looking on the streets just in case Nikki was walking home?
I mean, not really. I mean, the idea that she'd be walking that far away, I mean, yeah, if I saw a blonde girl walking down Monroe, I would have stopped and given her a ride home, but no, I did not see her.
Were you still worried about her at that time?
I mean, yeah, how was she going to get home? We thought maybe she would be home already, but she obviously was not.
And when you were in Doug's house, you were actively having a group conversation. You were talking about ways and things to try to look for Nikki?
I mean, I can't really recall exactly what the conversation between Doug, Dallas, and I was. We were just telling her, you know, try to call Nikki. We don't know where she is.
And welcome back, everybody, to the Law and Crime Network. We were just listening to the friend of the boyfriend, Douglas Dietrich, in the George Burch murder trial out of Wisconsin. How did you think, Andell, he performed on the stand? And I hate to say perform, but that's how we think of it kind of as we're watching this. I mean, but how do you think he did on the stand?
I think he did well, all things considered. I think he appeared to be credible. I think he appeared to be very factual about the information he's presenting, and that's how you want your witness to be. And I think the defense is going to try to get under his skin and try to change that a little bit. They want to change the playing field. They want to change the landscape to go in their favor. They want to make the jury remember that he was actually the first guy that the police arrested for this crime, and that as they said in their opening statement, the police got it right the first time.
Andell, and sorry to cut you off there on that case, but it looks like we have our feedback, our live feedback in the Donald Smith case. That is the case that we are following out of the Florida area. Horrible, horrendous case, really, involving a man who was convicted of raping, sodomizing, murdering an 8-year-old little girl. It looks like court has begun. This is the death penalty phase. Before we go there, I want to thank Andell for his commentary and for joining us this afternoon, as always, and his insight. But let's take it to Florida.
Thanks for having me.